The Book of the American Pit Bull Terrier. Richard F. Stratton. Chapter 10. The Arena. I have never been able to understand why pigeon shooting at Hurlington should be refined and polite, while a rat-killing match in Whitechapel is low. T.H. Huxley. In this chapter an actual match scene will be described, but before we get to that I would like to discuss some items that will help put the visions to come into perspective. I have often been bewildered by the Humane Society's intransigent stand against dogfighting. It isn't just that it is against it, I would expect that, since everyone automatically thinks that fighting is cruel. The only argument, however, I have ever heard made to pit dog men is, no one would ever say dogfighting was not cruel if they could see the condition of the dogs after a contest. Well, that's like judging the game of football by the battered athletes in the training room. At this point I can hear another cliché mouthed by the humaniacs: don't ever compare dogfighting with football. The difference is that the football player is there because he chooses to be there. The dog does not. Well, let us put aside the ignorance of philosophical determinism and of human psychology that is manifest in that statement. Instead of getting into technicalities, we will treat the statement as if there were no controversy about the first part of it and take it as it is. Hypothetically, let us take the very best football player that is the most enthusiastic about his sport of any player in the world. Okay. Now multiply his love for the sport by at least 1,000 times and we begin to get an idea of just how much a bulldog loves fighting contact. Incredible? Not really. Simply take into account that a superb human athlete is an accidental combination of genes, whereas the bulldog is the product of centuries of selective breeding. Well, anyway, getting back to the condition of the dogs after a fight, I have always said that the only possible grounds for a charge of cruelty would be the recuperative period afterwards. That, however, doesn't mean that the dogs didn't enjoy the actual fighting. Otherwise we could argue that the pains of childbirth disprove the joys of sex. Anyway, the dogs don't really seem to suffer much during recuperation, other than a little soreness and stiffness. The very wounds, the cuts, that bother the critics the most seem to bother the dogs least. Even granting that there is an element of cruelty to dogfighting, I am puzzled by the priorities of the humaniacs. Why does dogfighting always seem to be the number one target? I have tried to see things through their eyes. It may be that even humane-oriented groups are aware that such things as simple neglect and steel-jawed traps constitute genuine cruelty. It is, however, quite possible that they figure that extenuating circumstances are quite often present in the first case and that trapping is at least of some economic benefit to mankind. With dogfighting, on the other hand, it may seem that there is no excuse for such premeditated cruelty. You can see that I really am trying to see things from their perspective. I am inclined to think that the real reason behind the order of priorities, though, is a simple matter of the resistance that is met and the support that can be generated. For example, in at least 2 states proposed felony legislation against animal fighting had included cockfighting. In both cases the cockfighting part of the legislation got kicked off. Why? Well, probably there were at least 2 main reasons. First, since very few people keep chickens as pets, it was undoubtedly difficult to get people worked up to a feverish pitch over any sport involving them. Second, chicken fighting is much more widespread than dog fighting. There is considerable money and influence involved. Hence its practitioners were able to make their power felt and quash the section against cockfighting. It is a significant problem that people have a tendency to think of pit dogs in terms of their pet house dogs. This is a big mistake, unless their house dog is a pit bull. A fight would be a very unpleasant thing for their house dog, ergo, it must be unpleasant for a pit dog. The public could stand to be educated about the ways of performance breeds and their owners. For example, the very worst thing you could do to a coonhound would be to make a house dog out of him and never let him hunt. Conversely, it would be cruel to dump your Bichon Frise in the woods in the dark of night, alone and terrified. The situation is the same, but the choice of breeds makes the difference between misery and pure joy. That's true in dogfighting, too, and it's time our friends learned this simple fact. There is a qualitative difference in attitude between individual pet owners and the person who thinks of dogs as breeding stock. A famous axiom among show dog breeders is, "He who will not drown must not breed." Thus some show dog people drown puppies at birth because they have an obvious fault, i.e., wrong color. I have also known of show dog people who had grown dogs put to sleep because they were taking up kennel space that could be used for maturing young dogs that had better conformation. There is nothing cruel in this, of course, but the point is that people who raise dogs generally become less sentimental about the individual dogs and think more in terms of breeding goals. Breeders of performance dogs are even more calloused. It is common practice for bird dog breeders to do their thinning out just prior to hunting season. Those dogs that do not point or are inadequate in other ways are not brought back from the field, but rather they are planted there. Dr. Leon Whitney used to claim that the worthiness of a breed was directly proportional to the hard-to-please nature of its breeders. I think he had a point. It is not my purpose to apologize for dog breeders as a group, but I wanted the pit dog men's actions to be judged against that group and not against the individual pet owner. Well, I promised a peek at the pit, so here we go. The site for the matches is the basement of a nearly completed luxury house. Only the exterior and a few appointments are unfinished. As it turns out, the promoter of these matches is a contractor, and this is his house and property out in the country area of a western state. The eventual buyer of the home will never know what went on one night in his newly prized acquisition. A spiral staircase leads down to the enormous basement. Spotlighted there is a 16-foot square pit surrounded by 3 tiers of bleachers. The pit looks something like a boxing ring except that it has wooden sides. The floor of the pit is covered with a red carpet. Scratch lines have been laid down in the form of plastic tape 4 feet out from 2 of the corners. There is a separate room for weighing and washing the dogs. There is a set of scales and 2 tubs in the room, one for washing and one for rinsing. A coin is tossed and the winner of the call announces his dog will be washed second. This is to be expected, as the dog that is washed first may use up some of his precious energy in his excitement at being in the pit while waiting for the other dog. Thus, there is a minute advantage to be washed second. The first dog brought to the pit is a solid reddish fawn-colored dog. Fawn is usually called red by pit bull people. He looks around in eager anticipation for the other dog, and meanwhile his handler tries to keep him as quiet as possible. Already members of the audience are offering bets. 100 on the red dog. You're covered. Okay. Who else likes that spotted dog? And so it goes. Strange as it may seem, although these bets are strictly verbal, I've yet to see any altercation about someone not paying off. Now here comes the red brindle-spotted dog carried in the arms of his handler. The dogs are silent but look at each other with the eagerness of two long-lost lovers that can't wait to be in each other's embrace. The referee, a big man with a booming voice, announces the contestants, their weight, 48 pounds, then says, "Ready, gentlemen. Release your dogs." The two dogs come together like a couple of freight trains. The red dog immediately takes command, putting the spotted dog down, digging deep into the shoulder and clamping down hard. Neither dog is growling or crying out. The only sound emanating from the pit is the heavy breathing of the dogs and the occasional snapping sound of muscles and tendons under stress. The red dog continues to dominate and he demonstrates that he is a hard biter. He is able to do much more damage than the average dog. The white head and chest of the spotted dog are colored red now, but there is no spurting of blood as a neophyte might expect. At the 20-minute mark the spotted dog begins to even things out. The red dog has not paced himself well and he is beginning to tire. The white dog gets the red dog down now and shakes him with vigor. So goes the fight, with the spotted dog taking over more and more. The red dog occasionally gets the upper hand, but his holds have less authority now. The crushing power in his jaws has ebbed considerably. In the meantime the spotted dog, if anything, seems to be growing in strength. When he has the upper hand, he shakes the red dog until he rattles. Suddenly the red dog turns his head and shoulder away from his opponent but then turns back into him and seizes hold of his lower jaw. It was as though he momentarily lost his enthusiasm for combat and in the midst of an attempt to escape, or turn away from punishment, he suddenly regained his desire. The handler of the spotted dog asks for a turn and the referee obliges, declaring that the red dog has turned. The significance of the turn is that the dogs may now be picked up when they are free of holds and the red dog must demonstrate his willingness to continue the combat by making a scratch. It is 10 more minutes before the handlers are able to pick up the dogs. The red dog holds the lower jaw for 3 minutes. The spotted dog finally frees himself by pushing into his opponent, twisting and finally getting a nose hold. He throws the dog hard, using the nose hold for some sharp leverage. He shakes the nose hold out and loses it. Quickly he grabs an ear and shakes the red dog hard, banging his head on the padded floor. Finally he lets up a little, standing and resting while holding the red dog's ear. After a brief rest the spotted dog starts to shake the red dog by the ear again and loses his hold. His handler immediately grabs him up in his arms and the other handler deftly picks up the other dog. The dogs are taken to their corners. The referee throws a wet sponge to each dog's handler. The dogs' heads and shoulders are faced to their respective corners, but both are trying to get around to their opponents. The handlers, meanwhile, are busily checking their dogs' mouths, sponging the dogs down and massaging them. The referee's voice comes booming out. 25 seconds. Face your dogs. Red dog to go. Ready. The referee looks at his watch. After 5 more seconds he commands, "Release your dog." The red dog's handler releases his dog and he starts across at a run, headed for his opponent in a line so straight that he might as well be on rails. The spotted dog's handler holds on to his dog until the red dog is nearly there, Then he releases him so that he won't bear the full brunt of the red dog's charge. In another 2 minutes the dogs are momentarily free of holds and are snatched up expertly by their handlers. Good handle, compliments the referee. The dogs again are taken to their corners and ministered to as before. This time it is the spotted dog's turn to scratch. The referee announces, 25 seconds. Face your dogs. The handlers swing around. The spotted dog's turn to go. Stay back of your scratch lines, gentlemen. Ready? Release your dog. The spotted dog shoots across the pit like a rocket, knocking the red dog into his own corner with the force of his impact. The crowd applauds the spectacular scratch. In another 5 minutes the dogs are picked up free of holds once again. After the usual ministrations in their corners, the red dog is ordered released for his scratch. The red dog goes across in a rush but stops about 6 inches from his opponent. The referee begins counting as does a boxing referee after a knockdown. When the red dog fails to take hold by the count of 10, the referee points to the spotted dog's corner and announces him the winner and the time, 55 minutes. The handlers leave with their dogs and the bets are paid off among the crowd. Then more dogs are weighed and washed. There are a total of 6 matches. Our next match involves 2 black dogs, one stocky solid black dog and the other a more rangy dog with a white blaze and white on his chest. At 1 hour and 5 minutes the solid black dog's owner concedes the match. Both dogs make game scratches. We see a number of outstanding dogs in the course of the evening. The dogs are cheered alternately by the crowd when they make good scratches or clever maneuvers. The final match involves 2 31-pound females. One of them, Odessa, has won 2 matches previously, completely devastating opponents in a matter of minutes. Odessa is a good-looking red-nosed dog with full-drop natural ears. She has a stocky build for a female. The other female is colored identical to Odessa, including exact coat shade and the red nose, but she is ringier and has cropped ears. Her owner has seen Odessa's 2 prior matches and knows what he is going up against. Obviously he has confidence in his dog's ability. The match turns out to be a real slugfest. Odessa is not able to dominate this little female as she did the others. In fact, she has her hands full just trying to stay even in this match. Both animals are lightning quick and are expert on attack and defense. First one takes the advantage and then the other. At the hour mark the pace slows. There has not been a turn and there have been no pickups and no scratches. It boils down to Gameness now and Odessa is still slightly behind in the match, but she keeps pressing, not allowing her opponent a moment's respite. Finally, at 1 hour and 20 minutes, a turn is called on Odessa. She was not turning away from punishment or because of waning enthusiasm. Rather she made a clever maneuver to escape a hold and gain one for herself, but it is still technically a turn. Odessa scratches hard and true, as pit dog men like to say, but when it is the crop-eared dog's turn, she stands on her scratch line and takes the count. So Odessa wins in 1 hour and 37 minutes. With the 6th match over, let's have a quick critique. First, no dogs were killed in the pit. And no dogs died after the matches. 2 dogs were put down afterwards by their owners because they were unsuitable for matching or breeding since they had demonstrated a lack of deep gameness, the loser in the first and last matches. That doesn't mean that there are not matches where a dog dies afterwards, however, it is not the object of the game. Therefore, a sensationalist-type article on pit fighting, written by someone who had obviously never seen one, titled, "To the Death," has obviously missed the mark in more ways than one. Especially since an actual death in the pit is a real rarity for several reasons. First, a bulldog, while formidable, is also tough and hard to kill. Second, the rules provide that a dog loses and the match ends whenever a dog wishes to discontinue the contest. Third, most dog men do have a feeling for their dogs and they are not going to leave them in to be killed for no reason. Chapter 11. Red Sky in the Morning. Petty laws breed great crimes. Ouida. He who loves the law and sausages should watch neither being made. Otto von Bismarck. Early one morning in the summer of 1974, I was on my way to a meeting in the North County of San Diego. As I headed up the gigantic ramp to where Highway 805 spans Mission Valley, I glanced back to the east and saw a rare phenomenon in our part of the country. A spectacular cherry-red sunrise glowed in the cumulus clouds that towered above the mountains. At almost the same time the radio caught my attention. Washington columnist Jack Anderson was giving his usual early morning report. As was his custom, he ended his broadcast with a series of predictions. In an ominous tone he predicted that the next big scandal would be the cooperation of law enforcement agencies in the staging of illegal dogfights. Well, if Anderson reported that, I knew that someone was raising Cain in high places about dogfighting. I hated any publicity about pit contests since past experience, although limited, had taught me that in addition to being nonsensical, it nearly always reflected badly on the American Pit Bull Terrier breed. I glanced back at the sunrise again, and I was reminded of an old sailor's proverb, "Red sky at night, sailors delight, red sky in the morning, sailors take warning." I dreaded what was coming. I did not have long to wait. Soon the papers were filled with all kinds of incredible stories. "Jurors hunt police link in dogfights," said one headline. "Blood poured on dog to arouse him for fight," screamed another. Another stated, "Vicious sport pits killer dogs in fatal combat." And so they went, one headline after another, but beneath them all the stories had a definite similarity, as though the news source were the same even though the stories appeared in various different parts of the country. Basically the stories told of how killer dogs were trained for fighting by baiting them with puppies and kittens when they were young. According to the news stories, a single fighting dog would kill about 100 puppies and kittens in the course of its training. Then at the fights pigeons were killed and their blood poured on the dogs to arouse them to fight. In spite of all this training, the dogs still had to be goaded into fighting by the use of electric cattle prods. Most of the fights ended in death, and in 40% of them both dogs died. Besides the blood and gore, there was a definite emphasis on the big money that changed hands at the fights. In addition, the matches were a magnet for large-scale prostitution and a major market for hard drugs. The point was made that men did these unspeakable things because big money was involved. Most of the stories emanated from various humane-oriented groups who were in close contact with each other and apparently engaged in a contest to come up with the biggest fairy tale. All of these stories were told without any documentation whatsoever by sources variously cited as humane officers or undercover investigators. One man, in particular, was a purveyor of this type of nonsense, and he even started an organization that solicited contributions for fighting this so-called sport. I don't know how much money was taken in, but I did notice that the individual mentioned seemed to have plenty of time on his hands, always traveled first class and was expensively dressed. I don't want to imply here that there were no sincere people involved in the battle against pit fighting, but obviously there was at least some profiteering involved. And the fact remains that stories were being promulgated as gospel that were absolutely inane and did not contain even a nucleus of truth. The perpetrators of these yarns had to know they were nothing more than that, wild yarns. The situation got to the point that the devotees of the American Pit Bull Terrier practically flinched every time they picked up a paper in anticipation of what the next slanderous item would be. What everybody feared most was a push for legislation to outlaw the breed. Some of us older fanciers remembered the 1948 column by a nationally syndicated writer. According to the columnist, a Florida woman had been killed by a pack of bull terriers. He knew that bull terriers were bred and trained to be killers, ergo, the breed should be eliminated. The best way to eliminate the breed was to make it unlawful to possess it. Although that was a different time, I feared that it would not take much to stimulate similar thinking now. My fears were not all that far off the mark. Unknown to any of us, forces were at work in Sacramento to make keeping an American Pit Bull Terrier in California a hazardous enterprise. I don't remember exactly how the news filtered down, but eventually dog men were made aware of legislation pending in the state assembly to make dogfighting a felony. By the time I heard about it, some dog men had already made an abortive attempt to stop the bill. A local attorney who was also a pit bulldog enthusiast suggested we consult another attorney in town who had been involved in politics and was familiar with the nature of the writhings and slitherings within the catacombs of the state capitol. At this stage of our story we need to pause for a moment to examine the character of the man who ended up orchestrating the fight against the pending legislation. As a long-time resident of San Diego, he has accumulated considerable wealth, is quite intelligent and manifests wit and charm. However, he is flawed with a few eccentricities. At one time our crusader was an alcoholic and a hobo. I think it was from those old days that he drew the name for his strain of dogs. In any case, some of the old attitudes stuck with him even after he had conquered his alcoholism and became quite successful financially. For one thing, he never lost his love for the con and the hustle of his old, more poverty-stricken days. He also retained a habit of analyzing everyone and anyone from a strictly cynical point of view. Since I've known him, he has always utilized an adversary system in his business dealings and makes it a point to keep his adversaries off balance and on the defense. He hires and fires so many attorneys in his various legal transactions that he has a form letter for doing both. And this was the man who summoned the politically oriented attorney to his home. The presentation apparently impressed the attorney, for he became convinced of the righteousness of the cause and advised him on how to proceed. He should form an association with the express purpose of fighting the bill. This was done and Maury Rootberg was made treasurer. The attorney suggested a lobbyist to be utilized who was very close to the governor. Finally, he made out a little epistle to be delivered to the legislators. This is what it said. Re. AB 614. Author, Honorable Mike Antonovich, 41st AD. From Association for the Preservation of a Breed. Re. Why this bill should not pass. I. Basic Provisions, AB 614. 2. Interested Groups. 3. Arguments against the bill. A. An entire breed of dogs will be endangered by this bill. B. The proposed penalties under this bill are egregious, absurd and inconsistent with the other fabric of the penal code. Arguments advanced by the bills. Proponents are false. The proponents are the misled. Lengthening shadow of a single person, one Duncan Wright. E. The governmental costs of this bill, if enacted, would be burdensome. I. Basic Provisions, AB 614. This bill, if passed, would create yet another set of felonies where presently misdemeanor penalties exist, with maximum penalties of a $50,000 fine, a year and a day in custody, or both. The bill prohibits owning, possessing, keeping or training dogs, with intent that such dogs shall be engaged in an exhibition of fighting with another dog, cause ing one dog to fight another, abetting such activities or allowing them to occur on premises. Anybody present during such activities shall be committing a misdemeanor. 2. Interested Groups. A. Proponents. 1. American Dog Owners Association. 2. 1 Duncan Wright, ex-director of the above. B. Opponents. 1. Association for the Preservation of a Breed. 3. Arguments against the bill. A. An entire breed of dogs will be endangered if this bill passes. 1. See attached letters from experts in genetics and veterinary science. 2. Testing of any domestic species, thoroughbreds, corn, draft oxen, whatever, are valid and necessary way to responsibly breed that species. Here, the qualities bred for are, intelligence, total compatibility for living within a human family, and courage, in our terms, gameness. 3. This bill is aimed solely at the breeding, training and fighting of a single breed, the American Pit Bull Terrier, the only breed of dogs bred for courage, among other things. 4. Every effort is made by breeders and owners of these dogs to care for their health and safety. Rules are strictly followed in contests between these dogs in order to ensure such care, and to assist proper breeding, see below. B. The proposed penalties under this bill are egregious, absurd and inconsistent with the other fabric of the penal code. This bill would create yet another felony to enforce, with all that means in governmental expense. Other felonies exist to protect human safety, or to protect the citizenry against dishonorable acts like theft or fraud. These are offenses against persons or society's fabric. Not against the moral sensitivities of a small group who have been given bad scoop, and or who become faint when they hear of any vigorous activity. Assemblyman Ciarity voted against this bill, voicing such sentiments. Does California really need yet another expensive felony? 1. Drugs and prostitution are associated with these dogs. We know of not one arrest made in California for drugs or prostitution connected with breeding or fighting American Pit Bull Terriers, over the past 10 years. In any case, this is irrelevant to this bill. Present law can be effectively used against violators of these felonies. 2. Organized crime and gambling are involved. This is silly. The question here is, where is the money? And where is the opportunity for middlemen? We challenge the proponents to produce one California district attorney who has prosecuted for such activities associated with these dogs. 3. Fighting these dogs is inhumane in that many animals are killed or maimed annually. See attached, detailed rules used by all pit bull breeders in the United States today. These rules have been used since 1935, and their purpose is to protect the dogs from harm, and to meticulously discover which dog will first discontinue the contest. 4. Hundreds of dogs are hurt or killed annually. Breeders with over 30 years experience report that they have seen only 2 to 4 dogs actually die during a contest. This does not compare unfavorably with human sporting contests, such as boxing, football, rodeos, etc. The reasons for this low number are the rules, referred to above, and the love and care owners and breeders give their animals, and the responsibility they feel to their animals. 5. The American Pit Bull Terrier is a killer dog, a danger to the safety of man or beast. This is a flat lie. Thousands of Californians own these dogs as household pets. They are too friendly to be good watchdogs, and they only fight when they are attacked or, as we say in the animal world, challenged. We know of 0 instances when these dogs have attacked humans, a statement which cannot be said of Dobermans, German Shepherds, and other breeds of dogs which are used as watchdogs. These dogs, quite simply, are very intelligent, friendly and docile except when challenged by another dog. 6. The breeders, owners and fighters of these dogs are low-life, irresponsible, heartless creatures. This has been the picture so artfully painted by the proponents. It is just not true, and we believe that what is afoot here is the now common phenomenon of scapegoating. We again challenge the proponents to produce proof of this inflammatory allegation. 7. Dogs are often killed in training. This is untrue. It is impossible to kill these dogs in training. Training consists of conditioning which, in many ways, is similar to the conditioning of any other breed of working dog, to wit, work on treadmills, walking and exercising the dogs. 8. Family pets are often stolen and killed as bait by these dogs. This is not only fictional, but illogical. These allegations have been made in news stories, but this is something that breeders and trainers of the Pit Bull Terrier absolutely would not and do not do. The dog is a fighter, not a killer, and it would be inimical to any responsible training program that was not bred for that purpose. Why would a racehorse trainer train his horse by racing it against an elephant? The same reasoning applies here. There is no reason why one would engage in such unproductive and despicable acts. In summary, these arguments are irrational, illogical, unsubstantiated and false. D. The proponents are the misled, lengthening shadow of a single person, one Duncan Wright. Mr. Wright, as can be substantiated by newspaper clippings from across the country, has been touring this country, spreading the false and fallacious arguments outlined above, and attracting innocent citizens into his personal organization, the American Dog Owners Association. We submit that the poor members of this association have been callously duped by Mr. Wright. We sympathize with these people and invite Mr. Wright to send this document with its supporting data to each of his members. After all, if his allegations were true, what citizen in his right mind would oppose efforts, like AB 614, to curb such scandals. Unfortunately, for Mr. Wright and his members, the allegations are simply not true. The government costs of this bill, if enacted, would be burdensome. These are very tight budget times in California. Obviously, this bill will do its part, if it becomes law, to swell the tasks imposed upon sheriff's departments, police, jails and the courts. We do not know how to measure such cost with precision, but we appreciate, as all legislators must, that every increment adds to the budget, and makes government more and more complicated in its impact on citizens. We urge that these costs would be unnecessary, as well as utterly irrational, to incur. If there is crime, current laws can take care of that. Money is needed for more important matters than are represented here. 4. Conclusion. AB 614 is ill-conceived legislation which embodies bad public policy. Accordingly, it should not be approved. Its enforcement will be costly, worthy citizens and activities will be prosecuted, and further felonies with terribly heavy penalties will be added to the penal code which, in turn, will contribute to the upward spiral of the cost of law enforcement, while diverting law enforcement personnel from more vital citizen protective functions. None of the arguments of the proponents hold water under scrutiny, while legitimate animal breeding activities will be stopped. This bill will actually place an entire breed of dogs itself in jeopardy of destruction. For all the foregoing reasons it is submitted that AB 614 is a bad bill, and it should not be approved. Dated, May 21, 1975. Morris Rootberg. I received this letter and suggested only one change. I felt it was essential to be absolutely honest, and for that reason I felt that it was a misstatement to say that American Pit Bull Terriers would only fight when challenged. It is true that there are some that are like that, but there are also many that will go through a screen door or the glass of a window in order to get to a dog. In other respects the letter was completely accurate except for the threat of the breed's extinction. It would be a threat if the law were effective, but I didn't think it would be, and I was right. In the meantime the president and treasurer of the association met with the lobbyist in Sacramento. According to the lobbyist, chances of stopping the bill were slim, as it had already passed the House and the only chance we would have to make an impact on it would be during the hearing held by the Senate Judiciary Committee. There were two things going for U.S., though, according to the lobbyist. One was that the bill was a very poorly written one, and the other was that the co-authors of the bill did not have much stature among their professional colleagues. In the lobbyist's words, two of them don't know enough to find their way to the men's room, and the third can find the way all right, but he is at a loss as to what to do when he gets there. The association president had trouble marshalling support among the dog men, some of whom were distrustful of him, but many had differing ideas about how to oppose the legislation. Most did not want to expose themselves as dog fighters, and many felt the law would be of little consequence to them anyway. To be honest, they had a point, as none of them have been bothered to this day. Those of us who were determined to fight the bill were, however, concerned about more than just the dog fighters. We feared for the owners of the American Pit Bull Terrier in general and indeed for the breed itself. To his credit, the head of the association bore the expense of the lobbyist and attorney with very little help. The rest of us chipped in at least $100 apiece, and one fancier, who has kept several bulldogs for a number of years but has never so much as observed even a roll, contributed over $1,000. One of the main reasons that non-dog fighters were willing to oppose the bill was that the legislation would make possession of dogs with the intent that they be used in a fighting exhibition a felony. Such language was coming dangerously close to outlawing the breed. The day of the hearing arrived and a handful of us convened in Sacramento. There was my wife and I, 3 other dog men, and one of them had brought his wife. So we had 2 women and 4 men to oppose the bill, not exactly a dramatic show of force. If I had been in charge of this counteraction, I believe I would have had strictly pet owners of the breed on hand and no dog fighters. With dog fighters forming the main composition of the group, the illusion was created that the law would actually curtail the activity. The real threat was to the breed and, in retrospect, I think that should have been the substance of our opposition. The lobbyist, however, set us to do a little amateur lobbying, and he instructed that the thrust of our opposition should be that we don't want to be felons, and that we should stress that the law was unreasonable. So for a full day we set about to buttonhole the members of the Judiciary Committee wherever we could find them, sometimes in their offices but usually in the hallways or on the elevators. Just before the actual hearing, the lobbyist carefully organized how our presentation would be made. First, the opposition, actually the proponents of the bill, would speak. When it came our turn, the lobbyist would speak first. By this time I had already lost considerable faith in the lawmaking process. I did not care much for the lobbying activities, and I was shocked to discover that not one committee member had even looked at the draft that had been carefully drawn up by an attorney and delivered to each of them by registered mail. The author of the bill spoke first, giving all his puerile reasons for authoring such a legislative monstrosity. The effect of the lobbyist's work was shown in some of the hard questioning that was done by some of the members of the committee. Can't current law handle these crimes? Why was cockfighting taken off the bill? If this bill became law, a crime against a dog would be elevated to higher importance than a crime against a human. Following the author of the bill came a number of people who spoke for the bill, speaking of the horrible cruelties that were involved in the activity, not the least of which was the stealing of people's pets for the use of training fighting dogs. Of course, none of these people, including the author of the bill, had ever seen an honest-to-goodness bona fide dogfight, but they were all experts. Then the lobbyist spoke, agreeing that dogfighting was an unsavory activity. He stressed the unreasonable penalties stipulated by the bill. Then it was my turn. I concentrated on the inaccurate information that had been given the legislators by the proponents of the bill, and I asked that the legislators ask for some proof when such allegations were made. I then told them about the admirable qualities of the breed. During this part of my talk, I was interrupted in mid-sentence by one of the committee members. "You are just wasting our time telling about the breed, Mr. Stratton. As far as I am concerned, you are breeding dogs for fighting, and that is sick." I felt my face flush red in anger over the rudeness of the interruption and the unfairness of the remark. Whatever quaver may have been in my voice was gone now. My own fighting blood was up. I heard my voice boom over the PA system. "Mr. Chairman, I have been trying to make a point. I have said, first, that the members of this committee have been badly misinformed about the nature of dogfighting. This is fact. We can demonstrate it to the committee if you would give us the time. The other point I was trying to make was that we are dealing here with a worthwhile breed. He is good for things besides fighting, and that's why I told you about his use as a catch dog and a hunting dog. Just because someone breeds a dog for gameness does not mean that he is breeding him for fighting. Over 98% of the people that keep these dogs only want them for pets, but they still want them to be game. I was chagrined that Thad became angered, as we had been cautioned by the lobbyist not to let that happen. However, everybody seemed to feel that my presentation was a success. In fact, one of the dog fighters ever since then has always said that he wished he had a tape recording of the proceedings just because of my talk. Following me to the podium was the wife of one of the pit dog men. She answered questions posed for her by members of the assembly. One of the main things they wanted to know was the amount of money that changed hands during a match. The woman was honest about the average amount bet and how it all took place. One assemblyman said to the author of the bill, "Why these people are just making bets like crowds do at a football game, and you're trying to make it seem like a major gambling ring." Finally it was time for the vote and I was nearly ecstatic when we had apparently won. The votes to kill the bill were in clear majority. My feelings of triumph were punctured by the lobbyist who explained that several members were not present and they would be in to vote later. We would probably not know until the end of the day whether or not we had been successful. By this time the committee had taken up other matters. But sure enough, as we watched, various committee members came in and proceeded to mark their vote on a whole series of bills in the same way that you or I might mark a ballot. You can imagine how much thought was devoted to each bill. At the end of the day the bill had enough votes to clear it out of committee, and the author of the bill clapped his hands in triumph and accepted congratulations from some of his colleagues. So that's how it was done. What good was it to be given a chance to speak before the committee if absent members could come in and undo all our good work? We might as well have tap danced in front of the committee for all the good it did us. Naturally we were all disappointed. For all our work and expense we merely received a rather cynical lesson on the nature of the lawmaking process. I didn't know it then, but I was in for some even more extensive and expensive lessons on the nature of law.